Thank you for having me here today. My name is Vishawn Harper Young, and I am head of our BMO for Black and Latinx Business Program. I've been in banking for nearly 30 years in a variety of sales and management roles, and today I'm delighted to be the moderator for today's discussion. Due to historical and current systemic barriers faced by Black owned businesses, we know it is not easy to get to the road to success. At BMO, our goal is to have conversations and boldly grow the by breaking down these barriers, hopefully acting as a catalyst for positive change. Today, we will learn from Jeff Allen, Jason William Johnson, and Kevin Davenport, who will share and relate their perspectives, specifically highlighting some challenges and experiences faced by Black owned businesses and the resiliency to overcome these barriers. Now, before we hop into our panel questions, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First up, we have Kevin Davenport. Kevin P. Davenport is an established business program manager for the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center at the Chicago Urban League. He is also founder of the Idea Candidate, in a non for profit organization and training academy that focuses on corporate integration, personal development, and etiquette trainings for ages 16 to 24. Thanks for being here today, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on to our second panelist, Jason William Johnson. Jason is the director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Chicago Urban League. In his role, he develops programming and provides strategic direction for award winning programs that serves over 500 businesses annually. Jason is also an alum of Power Moves, the country's largest accelerator for technology startup founders of color. Jason was Central Regional Vice President for the National Urban League Young Professionals, in addition to holding various other leadership roles. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Vashan.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jeffrey Allen. Jeff currently serves as director in the Economic Equity Advisory Group at BMO Harris Bank in Chicago. Tasked with tasked with lending to minority-owned businesses, Jeff advises small and middle market firms on lending strategies, treasury opportunities, and enhancing overall performance by facilitating specific client needs throughout the bank. Jeff has executed strategy of management as U.S. head of underwriting and previously served as director U.S. commercial real estate. Jeff has sourced and structured over $600 million in transactions in his career. Great to have you here, Jeff.
Thank you, Vishal.
So, without further ado, dive into our panel. I want to start off with a question for all three of you. As we think about the importance of Black owned businesses and the unique set of challenges that Black owned businesses face, as well as the significance of Black History Month, what are your thoughts on how Black owned business has been resilient in the past and present? How do you think Black owned businesses find the capacity to go through the ebbs and flows of the economy? Kevin, let's start with you first.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I believe we all know how hard entrepreneurship really is. We've heard the numbers that, most businesses don't make it past 5 years, and, the percentage that drops off of more businesses that don't make it to the end of that decade. And, we also know the numbers and the stories behind Black history and how difficult that has been. And so, when I think about that question, I think that the only answer is through our persistence and our determination. And really what I'm most proud of as a people is our innovation. That's the only reason or the only way that we've been able to excel and thrive is that we've had to innovate. We've had so many things to overcome just on a personal level, from a society level, a community level, on top of you had entrepreneurship, one of the hardest things to do, to earn income, so I think that's the biggest step. And if you even look at what we've accomplished over the years as a people, I mean, the air conditioner, the clothes dryer, the folding chair, even the traffic light was all made by a Black person. And even industries that we don't dominate, like the golf tee, was made by a Black person. So these are things that I'm really proud of, and I think that's what has allowed us to sustain and survive and to thrive is through our determination, persistence, and innovation as a people.
Thanks, Jeff. How about you, Jason?
Pretty much, I'm gonna echo some of the things that Kevin said. Primarily through innovation, and we understand that necessity is the mother of all innovation. And due to the fact that historically we haven't had access to financial capital, we've had to rely on other forms of capital in order to, survive, to thrive, and to grow successful businesses. Black-owned businesses have had to successfully use their social capital, their relationships, their status in the community, and things like that in order to be able to grow and launch successful businesses. They've had to be able to use their knowledge capital, things that they do well, whether it's cooking, whether it's, cleaning, whether it's, finances, accounting, like law, like African-American businesses have done an amazing job of leveraging their knowledge capital in order to be able to, grow their businesses and to thrive and survive. So pretty much, a lot of the things that they're teaching in entrepreneurship and innovation classes, leveraging to acquire capital and things like that. African-American businesses have been doing this forever, right? And now there's some academic speak around it, and there's some conceptual, frameworks around these things. But Black-owned businesses have been doing a lot of these things, like leveraging resources, utilizing capital, creating minimally viable products, all of those things. We've been doing those things, forever. So it's just, that's how we've pretty much survived.
That's great. Jeff, what is your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with both Jason and Kevin's thoughts. To back up a bit, Vashawn, when you think about a company's ability to grow, whether it's hire more staff, purchase inventory, a piece of equipment or real estate, is done through a banking relationship. And unfortunately, Black and brown business owners haven't had these relationships for a number of years. And so when we think about the resiliency that Jason and Kevin talk about, that's how these companies have remained viable, is through grit, determination, innovation, and ultimately sweat equity, right? And so to be consistently resilient, these companies have to partner, Vashawn, with banking partners and other vendors to support their endeavors, collaborate with a trusted team. And most importantly, what we think is a bank relationship to grow your business is important to continue to remain viable. So that said, banking relationships, grit, determination, and personal resources are key to continue growing people's businesses, particularly in the Black and brown communities.
Those are all great responses. The innovation piece that we constantly having to invent and reinvent has just been historically a part of Black businesses. So those are great responses. Jeff, I'm going to stick with you. Can you explain to us the economic equity piece and what BMO's approach to this BMO Empower strategy?
Sure. So the bank's economic equity strategy, Vashawn, is captured within BMO Empower, which is an initiative from BMO, a $5 billion commitment over 5 years to support an inclusive recovery and ultimately help narrow the wealth gap. We know that Black and brown owners tend to have a more diverse workforce that in turn spend dollars in diverse communities and ultimately help recycle the dollar to create more wealth in these communities. Empower focuses on 6 pillars to invest this $5 billion. Nearly $1 billion of that is allocated to minority lending. $3 billion is allocated to community development on both the debt and equity side. $300 million to expand nonprofit lending. $500 million to increase LMI mortgage lending, which we know is key to wealth creation. And lastly, $500 million to increase philanthropy, build new LMI branches, and also increase our supply diversity spend. So ultimately, it's a 6-pillar strategy, Vashawn, when we think about BMO Empower. obviously adding value to the entrepreneur from soup to nuts for small and medium businesses.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'm sure there'll probably be more questions about BMO Empower later. Many of you know that our BMO for Black and Latinx program has partnered with the Chicago Urban League for partnership, education, and networking opportunities for businesses. So my question for Jason and Kevin is, can you speak to the programs that the Chicago Urban League offers, and how do you measure success?
All right, so I'll start off with a high level 30,000 foot overview. So our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation was launched in 2007, and we exist to support, African American businesses and launching, growing, and scaling. We're industry agnostic. People ask me, do we work with any specific verticals? I always just say Black, but for the most part, our focus is helping business owners at every stage. Whether they just have an idea or whether they're an established business, to help them grow and sustain their ventures. And we do that in a few different ways. We have entrepreneurship training cohorts, such as our Next Startup program for earlier stage businesses, our Next Deal program, which Kevin manages, and our Next Level Exchange program, which Kevin also manages, and he'll give you more details about those. That, in partnership with a few other organizations such as Women's Business Development Center, Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and Sunshine Enterprises. And then for our more established businesses who've been in business for at least 5 years, have employees doing at least $250,000 in revenue, we're relaunching our Next One program, which is a 9-month business accelerator for Black-owned businesses to help them gain contracts, to grow their capacity, and to be able to create additional jobs. Outside of our training cohorts, we offer one-to-one coaching. And I know, Vashawn, we appreciate you being a huge advocate about spreading the word to our one-to-one coaching program. But it's simple. You go to our website, shyurbanleaguecei.com. And then you can easily schedule a one-to-one coaching session with a subject matter expert. We have about 20 different subject matter experts, on the site that you can book a session with that helps in a variety of different knowledge areas. And then last but not least, we have events and workshops designed to help business owners, build their capacity, grow, and gain additional knowledge. We've been doing a lot of PPP and, grant related things, webinars on how to apply for those different grants kind of during the pandemic. But we also have tons of other workshops that we do, that help with marketing, business strategy, finance, and a variety of other things. So that's just like the 30,000 foot view of the program.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if I can kind of give like the closer, view of that, here what we do, we really focus on like the personal relationship of what we do with our coaching and all the services that we provide. Even to follow up what Jeff said, as far as, having the understanding of the importance of building that banking relationship. We help and we, service with that. So whether it's with BMO or, sometimes we have to have these difficult conversations with borrowers and say, you just aren't even ready to take that step to go to a formal bank. So we need to even, start that relationship. Maybe you need to go to a CDFI for, some of that lending, and then circle back, once you've built that relationship with BMO and, start there. We help with all of the different grant, over this past time. So the PPP grant, the big grant. So even like with technical assistance or the approval process, we've played a big hand in that. And then, again, servicing the unique needs. So sometimes it's not always just about, operating capital. It could be real estate needs. So whether that's, Neighborhood Opportunity Fund or the Small Business Improvement Fund, we will give access and resources and grant, support for those grant opportunities. We also partner with the Small Business Development Center councils. And again, we have specific programming for each specific person. So the Next Deal program is for procurement. So if you're looking to get your MBE, WBE, minority certified business, we help with that entire process, as well as even getting connected with the prime and sub opportunities. And even our mentorship program that Jason mentioned, which is Next Level Exchange, where we partner you with a mentor that's in your specific industry, that's either, sold their company or that's still, at a very large level in their respective industry, and they can help guide you and maybe even work collaboratively with that mentee. So we're just seeing, big growth, with taking that hands-on approach on like, let's sit down first, let's figure out what you need and exactly, and let's come up with a customized solution for that business.
Yeah, and to your point, both of you, the one-on-one coaching for businesses and the conversations that you're having with those businesses about access to capital is so important to the sustainability and the growth of those businesses. So when you think overall about your program, are there specific milestones that you can speak to as it relates to the Center for Entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll go to you, Jason.
Jason,
Yeah. Absolutely. So basically, on average, we support about 500 to 600 small businesses annually. Our business owners that we work with on average get about 35 to 45 million in contracts annually. They create about 100 jobs. And with the pandemic happening, we've partnered with the city of Chicago for their Together Now grant and their micro business recovery grant, as well as the state of Illinois. With their big grant, we were administrators on those 3 different grants. And we've given out about, at least last time I counted, about 6.1 million in grants to small business owners across the state of Illinois and in the city of Chicago through those partnerships as well. We've also given out grants through a partnership that we've created with Ford, about $100,000 in grants through that partnership. We've partnered with Valor Equity Partners to give out $100,000 in grants, Allstate, and $50,000 in grants. So not only are we partnering with municipalities and state governments, we're also partnering with private partners who want to really support African-American businesses directly. Also, another $25,000 given out through Maria Green's foundation as well. A variety of different private partners that have helped us infuse capital to small businesses as well. So those are some of the key milestones that we've hit. We do about 800 hours a year in one-to-one coaching. We do about 4,000 hours a year in entrepreneurship training, and that's just like the average over the last 5 years.
Wow, Jason, that is awesome. And I'm so happy that we have this opportunity, this platform for the Chicago Urban League to talk about all the great activities that you provide to small business owners, Black-owned specifically. I'm going to go to the paycheck. What I'd like to know from all of you, did you recognize a difference in subsequent rounds of PPP to address this gap? Jeff, I'll go to you first.
Absolutely, Vashawn. So what we noticed, the first round of PPP, a lot of Black-owned businesses were scrambling to secure banking relationships. As we know, you had to have a banking relationship to apply for PPP. And a lot of clients, prospects, and small business owners didn't have those relationships. And so successfully, a lot of folks made their way to BMO. Specifically, BMO funded $5.1 billion in PPP as of June last year, with obviously more to fund in this current round. And half of those were to borrowers who borrowed less than $35,000. And so although they scrambled, banks like BMO stepped up to meet the need for a lot of clients. What we're finding in this second round is that they have those existing relationships. And so it makes it that much easier to come back to BMO and to your banker to apply for that second round. And more importantly, to talk about the nuances of this second round relative to, or the third round relative to the first 2. And so when we have this conversation around banking relationships, this is an example in real time to speak to the importance of it. And so the scrambling is not happening this second time or third time around. And folks feel more confident in their ability to secure PPP funding and navigate the process via their banker.
Thank you, Jeff. Jason, would you like to speak to the differences that the Chicago Urban League may have experienced this current round versus the first?
Absolutely. And I pretty much echo what Jeffrey was saying. We were kind of more focused on the technical assistance side of things, as far as supporting business owners as they were applying for loans, making sure they had all of the documentation and things like that. And just like Jeff stated, first round Black-owned businesses were scrambling. And there was some concern because there wasn't really a lot of understanding on the loan forgiveness. So some of them were just afraid they were taking on additional debt, and they were already in debt. So there was some fear and aversion related to that. And then also just some concerns as far as making sure they have all of the things that they need to successfully apply. What we also noticed where there was a lot of instances where a Black-owned business might have been with the institution for 10 to 15 years, have several accounts with them, and they still weren't able to get loans through that lending partner. Second round, we saw some of that kind of slow down a bit, I guess, as some of the disparities and some of the challenges that were experienced during the first round came to light. A lot of business owners, a lot of organizations kind of stepped up to support Black-owned businesses. I know our board chair, Eric Smith, he was able to help help us connect a couple of business owners directly with BMO representatives in order to get funding, through the PPP loan. I think we referred 11 over. I think 4 actually ended up, and don't quote me, I got to go back and look exactly, but I believe 4 actually ended up, getting the loan through BMO. And then also the CDFI stepped up, and then we just really noticed that pretty much a lot of the challenges that we were facing, that Black-owned businesses were facing, rather, they kind of started to mitigate. Third round now, definitely, I think a lot of business owners kind of understand the process. If they're going for that second draw, I think systems are a lot more clear. I think disparities that Black-owned businesses face are a lot more clear now that we've been able to, now that some of the challenges from the first 2 rounds were kind of addressed. And I think it's a lot more smoother process. Technical assistance coaching sessions are like happening like this now, because, pretty much people will have the idea of what they need. And, pretty much they just kind of want to make sure that their intuition is correct. And, I think the process is going a lot smoother now. So we were building the plane as we were flying it, but I think, the lessons were learned.
Yes, and we can attest to that at BMO Harris Bank, that it was always being available to adjust as the government was changing the rules or didn't have complete knowledge of the rules. And so it was a very difficult time in the first round. And I do believe the second round has probably been much smoother. Kevin, can you speak to how the Chicago Urban League is getting the word out to members or just the community as to how you're assisting with PPP?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a dedicated email list that we've been growing over the years in our entrepreneurship department. So any opportunities that will go out, and we'll make that aware for everyone, how they can get involved. And then we also just, reach out to our assisting organizations. Like I said, we have partnerships with Women's Business Development Center, Sunshine Enterprises, the SBDCs, and even, community partners like BMO. So we just do our best to make sure that, our existing clients get the word out, and then as well as all of our, surrounding partners are aware of these opportunities, and that we're here to help and, to assist with that whole transition of how can Urban League help? What's the best way to communicate with us? And, that's what we do to get the word out. But as Jason said, and, Jeff said, I feel like the biggest thing that I've seen this year is, our businesses need to do a little bit better job of just getting their foundation together. The amount of businesses that didn't have a bank account set up, or the last 2 years of tax returns, even you had to have your City of Chicago business license active. So if you didn't even have your active license, we couldn't move forward. So there's just a lot of things that we have to do on the front end to get the foundation right for these small businesses, on top of just getting the word out.
Also, I like to add to that, one of the other things that we've also been doing is we partnered with the state of Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to do PPP outreach. We're partnering with a few local organizations through that initiative, Chatham Business Association, as well as New Covenant Community Development Corporation, to spread the word about PPP. We're working with the American Business Immigration Coalition as well. They've provided CPAs that could answer questions for business owners regarding PPP. And then Vashawn, the webinar that you guys actually shared with us, we've been sharing that weekly in our newsletter, just because we feel like, it answers a lot of questions that business owners may have. So we've just been sharing that as a weekly resource in our newsletter, just for business owners to be able to utilize that and to be able to be a resource to them.
Wow, thanks, Jason. It's good to hear that that webinar was very useful to your members in the community that you serve through the Chicago Urban League. Those are some very great insights of information that can be used to support Black businesses. And we thank you all for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us today. History has shown that Black-owned businesses have been resilient in tough times. Not only is access to capital a vital part of being successful, but access to education is ever more important. Now we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience. So let's open up for questions. Feel free to type in your questions in the chat, and the panel is here to answer any questions that you may have about the information provided today.
Don't be shy.
Oh, there's some questions. There's some questions coming through here. Let's see. Number one, for the Urban League, what is the most common concern you come across among business owners in one-to-one coaching?
Kevin, I'll let you kick that off.
I'm sorry, my computer broke up a little bit. Can you repeat that for me one more time? Sure.
For the Urban League, what is the most common concern you come across among business owners in one-to-one coaching?
Access to capital. By far is like the most, the biggest question, the most frequent question that I get in my coaching is, access to capital. And like I said, again, I think the biggest thing is like understanding when you need capital, what type of capital that you really need. I feel like what I try to do from that point is try to assess, how much capital do they need? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what's the best vehicle to go about, coming with that solution for what you're trying to accomplish. So, I find a lot of times too, our businesses are not operating as lean as they could, we could do some work with like trimming the expenses, analyzing, do you really need to do all these different operations? And then finally, when we kind of do an analysis and kind of check under the hood, there are quite a few things that we can cut off. It trims their expenses dramatically. And then even the capital that they were looking for either is much less or isn't the same type of capital that they were looking for. So, again, they might say, I'm looking for $100,000. And it's like, well, what are you trying to do? And, what is it? And then, okay, well, the best platform for you is the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. You really need real estate. And, so it really just depends on their unique thing. But it's always like some type of, access to capital. And traditionally, I would say, a good majority of our clients have already, attempted a few different platforms, whether that be traditional banking or venture capital, and they kind of come through the doors a little wounded and a little, just a little more timid as far as like how to move forward with, should I even try? Is my business worth it? And we say, absolutely. We just got to, sharpen up a few things and you absolutely will be eligible, for what you're looking for. So that's like the biggest thing, access to capital, just kind of positioning for that.
I'll
Yeah.
piggyback on that. I definitely agree that access to capital is what they come in asking for, but what they actually need is management knowledge, as Kevin kind of alluded to, because pretty much oftentimes, since a business isn't operating as lean as they can, they incur unnecessary expenses. They're not as efficient. And then pretty much once you kind of start digging underneath the hood and you're able to kind of look at, okay, how are they managing their processes? Do they have services that they really don't need? Is there redundancy in their staffing pattern? How can they make that lean? And how can they make that more efficient? And then when you kind of start, tackling some of those things, like Kevin stated, they recognize that maybe I don't need as much money as I thought I needed, or maybe I can leverage other forms of capital that I have, such as my relationships and leverage and things like that, as opposed to actually, going and taking on debt. So pretty much, I definitely second that. Like, access to capital is what they come in asking for, but really access to management knowledge is what they actually need.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you both for that feedback. Jeff, I'm going to give this question over to you. What does the future look like for Black-owned businesses?
Interesting question, Vashawn. I think it's bright when you think about the access to information. And so Kevin and Jason talked about access to capital, but we are at a stage in the world where you can access anything you want to. And so the information is available. Educationally, there are some challenges, of course, and some bridges for Black businesses to cross, but the information is available to you through organizations like BMO, Chicago Urban League, and other resources on the internet. I think it's bright. And so when you think about even the PPP process and how it started and where it ended, Black businesses are adjusting faster than before. We have access, again, to more information and resources and vendors and advisors. And today, I think the future is bright and the sky's the limit.
And I'm going to stick with you on that one, Jeff, and just kind of piggyback off of what you're saying. So what is the most important piece of advice can you give a Black-owned business today?
Self-awareness to know your strengths. Oftentimes, Black businesses are very good, or any business owner for that matter, is very good at their thing, right? So manufacturing their widget or providing their service. Be self-aware to know that you're not a CPA, that you're not an attorney, that you're not a banker. And so to pull those resources and those vendors to support you and make them part of your team. You can't do it by yourself. Well, obviously, as Kevin and Jason noted, being mindful of your expenses, to not be wasteful, and to manage redundancies. You have to spend the money to make money in terms of pulling in the right partners and sometimes paying them to do the right thing or provide the right service, whether that's legal, banking, or otherwise. And so I would say, Vashawn, to your question, be self-aware to know where your strengths lie. Expound and build upon your strengths, while also leveraging your network, as I talked about, and access to information and resources to outsource the things you don't know how to do.
Thank you, Jeff. This is for Jason from Valencia. What's the website to get more information on the Accelerate program?
So we'll be launching the program for next one in late March. So if you go to Chi Urban League, if you go to chiul.org, our main website, it'll be there.
Okay, this next question, what is the WBE MBE? Kevin or Jason?
I'll let Kevin take it.
Yes. That's a procurement term. MBE stands for Minority Business Enterprise, and WBE stands for Women's Business Enterprise. You'll also hear some of the other ones, like Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, Veteran Business Enterprise. And basically what this means is that you are certified with the county, city, or state that you are, 51% or more majority owned by that certification. All right. So even to give an example, I have a lot of couples that will come in, they're business owners together. Some will have, and on their operating agreement, elect to have the wife at 51% ownership and the husband at 49% ownership, just so they can be in MBE, since they're both African American, and as well as WBE, since it's majority owned by the wife, 51%. So now they can also go after those additional contracts. So those are like what you can do, but it basically opens up the door for you to bid on these government contracts. So, one easy one and a free one is called like the Illinois BEP program. That's with the state of Illinois. And it's a free platform, and you can get your MBE, WBE there, and then you can bid on those projects. And that's how you get on like, the sub or prime contract. So even to provide an example on that, basically what the government is doing, they want to spur economic development. And so they're saying with this contract comes, you have to give a certain percentage to an MBE or WBE contract. So, at O'Hare Airport, there's a ton of those contracts going on, right? You have excavation, you have, granite, whatever they're using to build, any of the construction services and fees. If the whole project is $10 million, 26% of that 10 million has to go to an MBE program. Another 6% of that 10 million has to go to a WBE program, and so on and so forth, based on that specific industry. So, it can really open up doors for you. And this is what we help here. And, the specific program for that, if anyone's interested, or workshop, I should say, is Next Deal. And it's actually starting from March as well. So anyone that is interested in that program, go ahead and send me an email, Kevin Davenport at shiul.org, and I'd be happy to walk with you further, or you can just find out more information on our general website, shiul.org. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And actually, that was a question as to how to acquire the WMBE status. So reach out to Kevin if you want more information at the Chicago Urban League on how you can get that certification. Jeff, going back to you, can you explain again what economic equity is?
Sure. So economic equity is essentially ensuring that everybody has a shot, right? When you think about access to resources, access to capital, access to things that allow businesses to grow. Economic equity is just that, right? Ensuring alignment for all minorities, for all business owners, that they have access to the same resources to grow their business. At BMO, obviously the initiative is $5 billion over 5 years, but it's ingrained in the culture of the organization. And so when you think about how important that is to Black and brown businesses, both on debt and the equity side, and ultimately the resources that we talked about a few times. So when you think about leveling the playing field, when you think about narrowing the wealth gap, when you think about an inclusive recovery, these are all things that are important to Black business owners. As we recover from this pandemic, hopefully in the next 12 months, it's going to be a test for a lot of business owners. And ensuring that the playing field is level and we all have access to the same resources, it's important we're mindful of, again, programs like Empower that encourage and are putting things in place to ensure that we all have access to the same success.
Thank you, Jeff, for that response. There's a question about the BMO for Black and Latinx businesses as it relates to the partnerships. And I'll speak to that. That program currently partners with the Chicago Urban League, the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Allies for Community Businesses in the City of Chicago Regional Business Center. Those four partnerships primarily are aligned to provide access to education and access to capital, as well as Allies supports other funding mechanisms and provides information on grant availability. A question related to PPP and how it affects the business line of credit, and I'm assuming this is a question related to the BMO for Black and Latinx program. The PPP loan is not taken into consideration when we're taking a look at underwriting or approving that particular loan. So that's my 2 cents as head of that program. Next question. How can we get the assistance to ensure that BOB and PPP loans are getting to our community? Jason, I'll go to you on that one.
Pretty much one of the things that I would recommend is, I guess from an organizational standpoint, we're already working with key partners to get the word out. Like we're working with the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity to get the word out. We're working with National Urban League to get the word out, and things like that. So I think a lot of that's already being done. And then also a lot of the technical assistance that's required to be able to support Black businesses. I think a lot of that's already in place. I think one of the things that has to be done better, and we're continuing to do that, just the Chicago ecosystem overall, is spreading the word about the resources that's available to Black-owned businesses and businesses in general on how they can receive support. What are some of the key organizations? There's Chicago Urban League, but there's a plethora of other organizations across the city. Sunshine Enterprises is a really close partner of ours. MS BARC in Bronzeville. You have QCDC, which just recently became a regional business center for the city of Chicago. That's Quad Cities Development Corporation. Quad Communities Development Corporation. I always just say QCDC, but there's a variety of other different organizations across the city that you can get the word on. So I guess a good starting point would be to join our newsletter. But then there's the City of Chicago, the Business Affairs and Consumer Protection Department, which kind of which manages the Neighborhood Business Development Center program, which has like tons of business development centers, that's in partnership with that. There's a lot of different resources. So I think ultimately it's about spreading the word. And then on your end, doing a little research so that you could, become aware of the resources that's available.
Thank you, Jason. Another question. As an existing BMO client, would you recommend working with the Urban League to assist in getting financing for expansion? Jeff, or I'll toss this over to Kevin.
Sure.
The question.
Go ahead.
Can we recommend ourselves?
Right.
Like, you know what we're going to say, but
what I can say is we're here to help out with all the technical assistance that you need. So, no matter what the services are, we are here to help, in the best way that we can. So especially, like I said, from that management perspective, bring capacity and just connecting you to our partners. So we'll figure out, what's the best option for you. So yeah, come on in, send me an email and we'll figure out what's the best route from there.
And I will second that. I highly recommend the Chicago Urban League. As you've heard today, there's a plethora of resources at the Chicago Urban League that can assist you on the educational part, especially when you think about expansion, how to be scalable. And I just think the resources at the Chicago Urban League are awesome. Here's another question. At first we were a little slow, and now it's very active. What are the requirements for neighborhood real estate programs? How would small business owners get financial literacy? Jeff, I'm going to go to you on what are the requirements for neighborhood real estate programs. I'm not sure if you have some feedback under BMO Empower, and then we'll swing it over to you, Jason, for any information that you may have on real estate programs.
I think that would actually be a better question for Kevin to answer, because it sounds like they're asking about TIF and SPIF and some of those other community-based programs. That's the kind of understanding I'm getting. That's kind of Kevin's expertise.
Okay. Jeff,
I agree. I defer to Kevin. I will say that these programs are supplemental, such that you have to have a business plan that makes sense on the commercial real estate side. So if it's investment real estate or owner-occupied real estate, whichever, these programs are meant to augment, not totally pay for the debt or equity requirement. And so I would back up a step and go further backwards and say, what are your sources of capital to begin with, equity, debt, and otherwise, and use these programs to augment what you're already doing. But Kevin, I'll defer to your expertise as well.
Well said. Well said. And, you know, the first one I want to throw on your radar is like one program. It's called somercor.com, SOMERCOR.com. And they're the organization that runs the top two of the most like prevalent, real estate programs, grant programs here in the city. The first one being Small Business Improvement Fund. That one is typically up to $150,000. Just like Jeff said, it isn't just for everything. You do have to be in have the certain financial stability. There are some different partnerships that you can do. I know in the past, some of the CDFIs have backed some of the small businesses if they do need some of that capital. And then on the other end, one thing I want to note, this is typically for commercial business as well as mixed use. This is not for residential. All right. So for the SOMERCOR runs both of these programs. Again, for the city of Chicago, you have the SPIF, which is Small Business Improvement Fund, that's up to $150,000. The second one that you'll hear the most, and they just closed around, is called NOF, Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. And this one can go from $250,000 and above. All right. So similar products, LMI communities. But again, this is a great platform if you're looking to, grow your business and do it in a debt-free way. And again, to kind of hone in on that, when we talk about the positioning for these two platforms, just to start, SPIF is an open platform, meaning anyone can apply and pretty much get enrolled and approved at any time in the year. Whereas NOF works in rounds. So it's extremely competitive. All right. And they also do they put a lot more marketing dollars behind marketing NOF. So it's a lot more competitive. And obviously you see it's a little bit, more money so you can get bigger buildings. So, with that, we've seen a lot of success depending on what the need of that small business owner. If you're only looking for something for 100,000, probably SPIF would be the better option for you versus NOF and probably the fastest turnaround. So other strategies that we can do, you have the TIF funding, there's opportunity zones. In addition to that, some of these are complementary, which means you can be in an opportunity zone and get your NOF zone and then be in an SSA zone and get the tax dollars back. So there's a few strategies that you can use, but the bottom line, again, as Jeff alluded to, is that you need to be financially ready. You need to have a clear understanding of where you want to go. What's the vision of that building? You need to have identified what exact building you're going to want to bid on and make sure that building is in fact in an LMI eligible community for that specific grant. And last but not least, you have the best chance of getting approved if you're giving something to the community that isn't already there. All right. So if you're, just provide something that can be a huge value and something that's not there. So AKA, if you're in a food desert and you're bringing a restaurant, fantastic. But if there's 10 other restaurants in that LMI, then there might not be as much of a need versus if you brought a learning center there, so it just depends on what's the specific need for that community as well versus the value that you'll bring to that community.
Thank you, Kevin. And we have two final quick questions. And one, Kevin, this is directed to you. You stated that you did a Chicago license. Is that only for those businesses with brick and mortar?
No, that is for any business, but I do want to clarify that is, specific for, for the specific grant, and it can even be specific for your industry. So, not every industry will even require a state of city of Chicago license. Certain professions will have, the state of Illinois license, and that is acceptable on the city of Chicago. I'm trying to think, but I'm pretty sure it's like real estate. I don't want to butcher anymore, but there's a few industries that are unique in that sense. So it really just depends on which grant you're applying for and, aligning with that. But majority of the time, you will need that, especially with any City of Chicago grants, you will need a City of Chicago license. And if not, you'd at least need that state of, Illinois professional license.
I can run off a few that state certified or state, licenses. I know childcare is definitely one. Professional services such as, being an accountant, insurance broker, real estate, so a lot of those, anything that's managed by the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations, those don't require city business licenses as well. So you can actually go to the Illinois Department of Professional Regulations and actually look up an entire list that outlines, which one of those are covered.
Thank you. So with this final question, I'm going to ask that you include this in your final comments. You've shared a lot of valuable information here today. And so final comments, and to include, how do you think COVID has affected Black-owned businesses up to this point? I'll start with you, Jason, and then Kevin, and then Jeff for final comments.
Pretty much, it's exacerbated challenges that's already existed. So prior to COVID-19, Black-owned businesses were 9% of all businesses, but only 0.5% of all business revenue. Black-owned businesses, only 3% of Black-owned businesses have employees. And if, people are more likely to hire people who look like them, that kind of explains our employment issues in our community and whatnot, because Black-owned businesses tend to be in our community more so than other, forms of other types of business owners and whatnot. And so, that explains our unemployment challenges in a lot of instances. Also, Black-owned businesses' average gross receipts is only $58,000 compared to $524,000 for white-owned businesses and $129,000 for Latinx businesses. So pretty much these disparities have already existed, but when COVID-19 happened, it just exacerbated the already challenging conditions. I think I saw a statistic that 40% of Black-owned businesses have closed their doors during the pandemic. So basically, in a short and to summarize, it took a bad situation and just made it that much worse.
For me, I just think it's caused the small businesses or entrepreneurs to innovate and to reconsider what their service offerings are and how they can repackage their service offerings. Clear businesses like event planning has really been hit hard. It's like, how do you host in-person events with COVID? So they've had to design how they are doing these things. And so I really just think that's innovation and figuring out how to leverage digital marketing and new, resources is the best way that businesses can, kind of climb out and really thrive in this time of, especially, one of the success stories, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There are some positive sides to that. One business owner I was just working with, they did let go and had to, cut some of their operating expenses and some of the ways they were doing it, but they ended up saving, the 40% of their business. They had to cut back and invest another 15% into this new, digital platform. But again, if you look at the savings overall, 40 to now 15%, there's a nice cushion there. And now what used to be run by a person that they had to pay hourly is now, being run in a much more efficient way from an operating perspective, from their entrepreneur's, perspective. So there's almost like a double savings for them. So it can definitely help. It's helping them to grow more lean. And then, we were talking about it, she's like, this is going to open up another, hiring opportunity for, this next initiative I'm working on. So it's allowing her to expand her business and grow and scale in that way. So I just think leveraging your, digital and, thinking about how you can be innovative with your service offerings is the best way to survive during this time.
So I believe the old cliche is that when the North Side gets a cold, the South Side gets the flu, or I guess in this case, COVID-19. And so when you think about the economic disparities between Black and white business owners, keep in mind that access to capital not only means access to debt and banking partners, but it's access to liquid reserves, it's access to personal resources to ensure your business is viable when these things occur. Maybe it's not COVID-19 next time, maybe it's something different that that slows business down. Maybe it's a recession, maybe it's 2009 that causes you to shut your doors. I think the moral of the story is ensure that you have liquid reserves and more than enough to ensure the viability of your business. I also say be flexible. Oftentimes folks have done something that's made them successful and don't have the ability to pivot in the event that that method isn't working anymore. And so I would say to Black business owners in particular, be flexible, be pliable, and be able to pivot directionally. If that requires an updated business plan, if that requires wise counsel from your team, if that requires, again, analyzing your expenses or relocating to a new location, be open to that and do it early and assess your business often such that if you have to pivot, you can do so before it's too late.
Well, I want to thank you all for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us today. It is so important that we celebrate Black-owned businesses not only in February, but year-round, and continuing the dialogue as we collectively look to close the inequity gaps. Please visit our BMO for Black and Latinx Businesses website for more information on resources and future events, and check out the Chicago Urban League's Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Our guest today, and thank you for our attendees. Have a great day.
Thank you.